All right, guys, welcome to the last video of this chapter, where we are going to take what we've learned about supply, demand, and their elasticities and apply them to three specific cases. All right, so can good news for farming be bad news for farmers? Answer, absolutely. Let's just imagine a scenario, right? There's a new technology in town. It's hybrid wheat. The genealogy of wheat has been changed, okay? And so this new hybrid wheat increases the amount of wheat that can be produced on each hectare of land. Sounds pretty great, right? So farmers are now willing to supply more wheat at any given price. In other words, well, the supply curve is going to shift to the right? We're going to be able to supply more to the market. Okay, so anyways, is this going to actually make it better for farmers? All right, well, let's examine that. First, let's talk about the demand for wheat. Is the demand for wheat going to be elastic or is it going to be inelastic? What kind of things do you have to consider? Well, are there any substitutes to wheat? Actually, I should say, are there any good substitutes to wheat? Because I know there are some substitutes to wheat, and we can see gluten-free products. Are they much more expensive than wheat? Yes. Are they as good? They might be healthier. I'm not arguing that. I don't really know. But are they as tasty? I don't know. I would say that there's not really, unless you have an allergy or something like that, you're pretty much going to see the value in just eating bread with wheat in it, aren't you? Right? It tastes better, it's fluffier, and it's much cheaper. So anyways, and that's another thing. Wheat is very, very cheap. It's inexpensive. I mean, I know it's the main component in bread, but bread doesn't cost that much. So if the price of wheat went up 10%, or can I even say 20%, is that going to affect how much bread you eat and therefore affect how much wheat bakeries buy from farmers? Anyways, I don't think so. I think that the demand for wheat is actually very inelastic. The price goes up 20%. Yeah, the quantity of bread that you might eat might reduce a little bit, but not that much, not 30%, not more than the price increase, right? I think that for wheat, the quantity demanded of wheat is not very sensitive to price changes. And vice versa, if the price went way down, would you start eating more and more wheat? Probably not. Okay, so I'm going to say that the demand for wheat is inelastic. And what about the supply of wheat? Well, the supply of wheat, at least in the short run, is inelastic as well. I am filming this video in September, right? It's, well, actually October 1st now. So it is harvesting season. And if farmers want to supply more wheat to the market, basically we have to wait till the next harvesting season. It takes a year to do that. So yes, in the long run, farmers can respond to price changes in wheat, but in the short run, it's very difficult for them to do so. All right. So anyways, so I'm going to say, and we're talking the short run here, the supply of wheat is inelastic then in this case. So here, let me draw my supply and demand curve. Now, a new technology comes out. And it could be other technologies. It doesn't have to be hybrid wheat, right? Like new combines, new things like that, right? Okay, so anyways, so that increases the supply of wheat. Does that make farmers better off? And what I mean by that is it going to make the total revenue for farmers, is it going to make it increase? You might think it does, right? Hey, we've got this new hybrid wheat. That's going to make farmers richer. Well, you'd be wrong. Let's see what happens when we start to use hybrid wheat. We supply more to the market because the demand curve is inelastic, because people's quantity demanded doesn't change very much. It's not very responsive to prices. what we see is, yes, absolutely, it's true. We were here at P1 and we moved down to, oh, that's a little bit too far down, but anyways, down to whatever, P2. And the quantity demanded was increased, but the price went way down, didn't it? And so because of this decrease in the price of wheat, people out there didn't demand a whole bunch more wheat. The demand is inelastic. And so what happened really is farmers suffered. And what we see is that the total revenue for farmers actually decreases. The price they get for their wheat decreases a lot, and the quantity that they sell increases slightly. So what is really determining this? What determines whether or not the farmer increases the total revenue or decreases the total revenue? It's how people's demand, the quantity demanded, responds to those price changes. It's the demand line and the shape of the demand line, the elasticity of the demand line that matters. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's look at an example. Let's just pretend. I'm just pretending on this next slide that the demand for wheat is elastic. It is very sensitive to price changes in this case. In this case, would the farmer be better off? And let me just remind you, this is pretending, right? So yeah, so hey, we increased the supply. So right, the price went from P1 to P2. We saw a small decrease in the price and we saw a big, everybody responded a lot to that. Big increase in the quantity that was demanded. And what do we see? In this case, total revenue increases in this case. Too bad that's not true. Too bad it's not true for farmers. Farmers have lost a lot of money over the years because of this new advancements in farming, new technologies used in farming. In the 1950s, 25% of Canada's population was involved in agriculture. Now it's somewhere around 3%, right? And of course, in this situation, if you're a farmer, an individual farmer, and you just say, well, I'm not going to adopt this new hybrid wheat, well, everybody else will. The price is still going to go down in the market. It's just that your farm won't be as efficient. So there's pressure. Everybody has pressure. All these farmers have pressure to adopt this new technology. But as they do so, because the demand, it doesn't change depending on the price, the price does go way down and their total revenues end up going down. This is one of the main arguments that farmers have for subsidies. All right, so let's talk about OPEC. OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, right? Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Venezuela, Indonesia, they all formed, Iran, Iraq, they all formed a cartel. They all formed an agreement where they would cut their supply. Why would they cut the supply? Because they wanted to make more revenue. They could increase their revenues by binding together and cutting the supply of oil that would be sold to the market, and they could make more money. Let's see how that worked. Well, in other words, let's see how that worked in the short run, but actually it didn't really work in the long run. Okay, so yeah, this happened in the 1970s and 1980s when oil prices was very, very high because they formed this cartel and did that. Now, what do you think about the supply and the demand of oil and their elasticities in the short run? All right, so it isn't always the case, but back then especially, the supply of oil was inelastic, quite inelastic, okay? All right, and why? Well, you know what? It just takes time to develop new oil fields, right? How long does it take to develop an oil sands project? Quite a long time. But even those that are a little bit quicker, conventional oil or fracking and things like that, it still takes a bit of time. For those non-OPEC countries like Canada, United States, and other countries, those non-OPEC countries, to pick up their supply, right? And of course, they have an incentive to do because OPEC constraining the supply jacks up the price. Now all of a sudden the price is higher. So now those non-OPEC countries do have that motivation to start producing more oil. It takes time, guys. It takes time. Anyway, so the elasticity of supply is it's inelastic in the short run. And then the demand curve as well. Well, what do you think, right? You've got your car, right? You know, it's a big gas guzzler, and that's what you're stuck with. You still got to go to work. You still got to go to the grocery store. You still got to take your kids to school, etc. Right? And so, in the short run, at least, your demand is inelastic as well, as represented by this. Okay, and then they make the cut. They make the cut, and there it is. There's the change, right? OPEC cuts the price of oil, and what do we see? Well, we see that, you know, the price went up from here all the way to here, big fat increase, but the quantity of oil that was demanded, of course, it's going to decrease a little bit, and we're going to see total revenue increase for all those OPEC countries, and they can pat themselves on the back. They did themselves a really good job. They increased their total revenue. However, is that always true in the long run? No. In the long run, we get to make choices. So, for example, well, let's take the supply curve. The supply curve is going to become more elastic in the long run, right? In the long run, all right, when we're looking at that, right, in the long run, Canada, United States, all those non-OPEC countries can start producing more oil. What we also see is that in the long run, some of those OPEC countries were cheating. They were actually selling more oil than the cartel had agreed. So they were kind of breaking their agreements as well, because they could benefit from that. Everybody else cut. Well, I can sell a little bit more than what my quota was that I agreed to, and I get to make more money. And it wasn't just one country doing it. It's the deal, the cartel started to break down a little bit. So anyways, there was more supply, coming to the market. What about the demand curve? The demand curve, in the long run, you get to make choices. You get to get a fuel efficient car, right? And that's what happened during that time. Ford, Honda, Toyota, and other car companies started to produce a lot more fuel efficient vehicles. And people did start to, maybe share one vehicle in the household. They would eventually get rid of one of the cars instead of having two cars. And people were coming up with arrangements like ride sharing, and things like that to go to work and things like that after a while. So in the long run, people started to adjust. All right. And so when there's a change, when, OPEC decides, oh, yeah, we want to cut in this situation, well, what's the actual response, right? I mean, right? And right. So what do we actually see? Happening, right? So yes, there's a smaller increase in the price, but we see as there's a bigger decrease in the quantity that's demanded. And in the long run, what they saw is their total revenue come down. And actually, they started to lose market share because the prices were so high, when they cut prices in the short run, now all of a sudden you have Canada looking and saying, wow, the price of oil is like $100 a barrel in oil, or $90 a barrel of oil. Maybe we can make these oil sands projects work, right? Now they're profitable. And so that's what happened. And you saw all this non-conventional oil come to market, right? And that has increased the price. And that has decreased the price, right? Increased the supply and decreased the price. Okay, anyways, so you can see, and it's always the case, guys, in the short run, the supply curve and the demand curves are relatively inelastic. But over longer periods of times, they both of them become more elastic because we have more time to adjust to those price changes. All right, so drug-related crime. The idea here, what we're talking about here in this example, is narcotics that are heavily addictive, okay? And the idea behind this, and I think it's been well documented, right? That if you're addicted to hard drugs like crack or cocaine or whatever hard drugs are out there, if you have an addiction, when the prices of those, when it's harder to get money to buy those drugs, well, a lot of the crime, like break-ins, stealing cars, fraud, identity theft and all those kind of things, right? They're actually, the root cause of it is often some addiction of some sense. Sometimes it's a gambling addiction, but sometimes it's a drug addiction. People need their drugs, right? And so there's increased crime in that case. Okay, so we're going to come up with there are two solutions basically to fighting the war on drugs. Okay, and the first one is drug interdiction. And that just means, looking for drug dealers, the DEA, right? They would arrest a drug dealer. Who's your supplier? Trying to find out the supplier, and breaking like a drug ring, okay, and trying to stop drugs from entering the country somehow, right? And so you're going out there and you're attacking the supply of drugs when you're doing that, right? You're trying to find those criminals and get those criminals, throw them in jail, and get those drugs off the streets, right? So anyways, can we agree? What do you think about the demand of these hard drugs? Are they inelastic or elastic? If you're addicted to drugs, hey, you need your drugs, right? So they're going to be quite inelastic, right? And yeah, so okay, but what about the supply? Well, yeah, I mean, it might take a while. I don't know about how fast drug rings can respond to changes in price. It might take a while. A new drug dealer or a new drug kingpin, how long does it take to create an organization and be able to produce the cocaine in Colombia and get it shipped out here, and then have an organization that can disperse it throughout the country and things like that. I'm not an expert in that. I'm just gonna say that it's fairly inelastic here. Okay, at least in the short run. Okay, anyways, at least in the short run. All right. So what are we talking about here? Well, this is the first, right? The first price and the first quantity. But what happens? There's been a big drug bust. The police got the whole drug ring, right, off the market. Oh, excuse me. Off the market, and the supply curve shifts to the right. And what are we going to see here? Well, we're going to see a big impact on the price. And, because that demand curve is inelastic, people still need their drugs. Doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter the price. They still need my drugs, yo. So what do? And they don't have the money. So what do? What happens to drug-related crime? Crime starts to increase, right? I've got to get my drugs. I still need them. It doesn't, it's the demand curve, really, right? That is inelastic, that really governs this, right? Even the supply curve is shifted to the right. You still need your drugs. The price went way up. You still need your drugs. So you're going to find a way to get it, and crime goes way up. Okay. Now, what's the other way? What's the other way that we can prevent people from using drugs? All right. So, well, it's definitely education, right? Getting to people before they start doing drugs and talking to them about the dangers of drugs, so what if we took all the millions and millions of dollars we spent on drug interdiction and we transferred them instead to drug education, okay? Doubled our efforts like that, okay? What's going to happen if we're educating people on the dangers of drugs? What are we talking about? Shifting the supply curve or the demand curve? Yeah, you know it, right? We're going to shift the demand curve to the left. Oh, I'm so sorry about this really bad demand curve I just drew. It's sometimes hard for me to draw very well. Anyway, so it's shifting to the left, right? Okay, shifting to the left. Okay, that's a little bit better. Whatever. Okay, so what's going to happen then? We're sitting in this situation, going here. We shift the demand. That's right. The price of drugs goes down. That's right, guys. Right? And yeah, so we actually see that the price of drugs goes down in that case. What happens to the quantity of drugs that go down? That are demanded. I just blew it. They go down as well, right? So look at the benefit of that, right? We get to decrease the price of drugs. Okay, I don't know if that's really a benefit. Well, in a way it is. It's better for crime. What happens to crime? Okay, I guess the conclusion would be that drug-related crime would go down, right? Those that are addicted to drugs maybe they don't need as much money for their drugs, that's right. But you're actually reducing the quantity of drugs that are demanded as well. So which one do you think is better? Should we be doubling our efforts on drug education and maybe decriminalizing drugs? Or if not decriminalizing, then just spending a little bit less money on our drug enforcement and allocating that money to drug education instead. I'll leave it up to you. All right, guys, so quick quiz. How might a drought that destroys half of all canola crops be good for farmers, right? It just might be good for farmers, right? Well, what do you think? What are we talking about? The supply curve or the demand curve? Right? A drought destroying half of all canola crops. Well, right? Canola, if we assume that the demand for canola is in fact inelastic, then what we can do here is, yeah, we can draw our supply curve, shift it to the, definitely we would be shifting it to the left here, right? And what do you know? What do you know? Wow. Yes, that's right. The price just shot up. The quantity demanded, yeah, is down a bit, but ultimately it's that total revenue for farmers is going to go up, isn't it? So hey, why don't farmers destroy their own crops? Right? Just destroy their own crops. Is that going to work? No, it just wouldn't work, would it? Right? Because you as everybody else, if you're a farmer, you could just let everybody else burn their crops down. Now there's less supply to the market, but I still got my supply. It just wouldn't work. The incentives don't work that way, right? Um, the individual farmer would benefit from reneging on the agreement to destroy half of your crop. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the chapter. Bye-bye.